The porcelain cup slipped from Charles Whitmore's hand, shattering on the floor. Mara's voice tore through the silence. "Don't drink it." For a second, no one moved. Steam curled from the spilled tea, the scent of chamomile turning bitter in the air. Charles looked between his wife and the maid, and that was the moment everything began to fall apart. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica? From the outside. The Whitmore estate looked like something out of a Kentucky postcard. Sprawling horse pastures, stone fences, a white-columned mansion that caught the sunrise just right. To the neighbors, Charles Whitmore was the kind of man people admired. The billionaire who still said hello at the farmer's market, who sponsored the local Derby festival, who shook hands instead of flaunting status. He was the picture of Southern success, born in poverty in Somerset, worked his way through college laying bricks, then built an empire in real estate and tech investments. Lexington business papers called him the man who bet on the right dirt. But inside that white mansion, the air had grown colder. His wife, Elena, once the vibrant host of every charity gala, now seemed like a stranger. She moved through rooms like a ghost in silk robes, her smile practiced, her words clipped. Some days she didn't come down for breakfast at all. Mara Bennett, the maid who had been with them for 3 years, noticed everything. She was quiet by nature, polite, punctual, and proud of her work, but she had learned that even in big houses, secrets echo through hallways. It started with little things. To coffee cups left on the porch table when Elena swore she'd been home alone, a faint smell of cologne that wasn't Charles's, phone calls late at night, followed by muffled sobs in the bathroom. Charles tried not to notice. He'd always believed in giving Elena space. She'd stood by him through the lean years, after all. But lately, she didn't stand by him at all. She stood apart. The marriage that had once felt unbreakable now felt politely staged. Mara tried to ignore the tension. Her job was to clean, not to interfere. But one morning, while she was dusting the breakfast nook, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart sink. 2 lipstick-stained mugs, one with lipstick far too bright to be Mrs. Whitmore's usual shade. She washed them quietly, trying to convince herself there was an explanation, but the house felt heavier every day. Like it knew something. She did in single quotes T. Elena began leaving for appointments in Lexington, always mid-afternoon, always returning just before dinner. When Mara asked if she should prepare lunch before she left, Elena's tone turned sharp. "Don't worry about my schedule. Just do your job." Charles, meanwhile, had buried himself in work. His company was expanding into Tennessee, and he spent long hours in his office on the second floor, overlooking the pastures. Some nights, Mara would bring him dinner and find him staring out the window instead of eating. "You all right, sir?" she'd asked once. He gave her a polite nod. "Just tired, Mara. It's been a long few months." But the truth was, exhaustion had a name, and it was suspicion. Charles had grown up believing that if you worked hard and loved harder, life rewarded you. But lately, he'd begun to wonder if success had cost him something more than time. Then came the morning that set everything in motion. It was a quiet Sunday, the kind where you could hear the horses snort from the back paddocks and smell bacon drifting from the kitchen. Elena came down dressed beautifully, though no guests were expected. "Morning, dear," Charles said, setting aside his newspaper. She smiled faintly. "Just felt like dressing up today." Mara served breakfast, scrambled eggs, biscuits, and tea. Elena barely touched hers, only sipping her cup slowly. When Charles went upstairs to take a call, Elena followed Mara into the kitchen. You've been with us a long time, haven't you? Elena asked softly. Yes, ma'am, Mara said, drying her hands on a towel. Elena's eyes flicked toward the doorway. Then I trust you know when to mind your business. Mara froze. The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. Yes, ma'am, she whispered again. Elena smiled, polite, but empty, and left the room. That evening, Mara found a small amber vial on the counter, near the teacups. The label was faded, but she caught the word digitalis. Her stomach turned. She'd heard of it before. A heart medication, one that could be deadly in the wrong dose. She set it aside, assuming it belonged to Charles. He'd had mild blood pressure issues for years and tried to shake off the unease. But 2 days later, something stranger happened. Elena asked Mara to prepare tea for the study. Chamomile. Dear, he likes it sweet. When Mara reached for the honey jar, Elena stopped her. No need. I've already sweetened his. It was such a small thing. But something in her tone made Mara's pulse race. She watched as Elena carried the tray upstairs, her movements too careful, too deliberate. And when Charles called out from his office, Thanks, love. I needed that. Something deep in Mara's gut screamed wrong. She didn't think. She just ran. Her shoes slid on the polished floor as she burst into the study, breathless. And that's when she saw it, Charles raising the cup to his lips, trusting, unaware. Don't drink tea, she shouted, voice breaking. The room went dead silent. And in that instant, everything, the marriage, the mansion, the illusion of peace, shattered like glass. The sound of the cup breaking echoed through the Whitmore mansion like a gunshot. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Then Elena's voice sliced through the air. What is wrong with you, Mara? Her tone was low, controlled, but her eyes weren't. They were sharp, defensive. Mara could barely breathe. I thought I saw something, she stammered. In the tea, ma'am. I didn't mean. Charles bent down, picking up the largest shard of porcelain. His reflection trembled in the small puddle of tea beside it. You thought you saw something. Yes, sir. Elena stepped closer, her hand on her hip. She's been acting strange lately. Charles, maybe she needs some time off. But Mara didn't back down. Ma'am, please. There was something in that cup. It didn't look right. Charles glanced at the tea again, then back at her. Something inside him twisted, half embarrassment, half suspicion. All right, he said carefully. Let's just calm down. He turned to Mara. You can go for now. I'll handle this. Mara hesitated, eyes darting toward Elena before stepping back. Yes, sir. When she left the room, Elena exhaled sharply. She's lucky I don't fire her. But Charles didn't answer. He just stared at the spilled tea, uneasy. Something about Mara's panic hadn't felt like a mistake. It felt like fear. That night, the mansion stayed quiet. Mara locked herself in her small room above the garage, hands shaking as she replayed the moment in her head. She wasn't crazy. She knew what she saw. When the light hit the tea just right, there'd been a shimmer, something oily, off color. Wrong. The thought of it made her stomach turn. She wanted to leave, to walk out and never look back, but something in her conscience wouldn't let her. She'd worked for the Whitmores for years. Charles had always been kind, respectful, fair. He didn't deserve whatever this was. The next morning, Charles skipped breakfast. He stayed in his study with the door closed. When he finally emerged, his face was pale, tired. He told Mara he'd sent the remnants of the tea to be tested, just in case. That just in case hung over everyone. Elena acted as if nothing had happened. She watered her orchids, called a friend, and hummed softly in the kitchen to softly, to casually. But when Charles came downstairs, she looked at him with tight politeness. "Are we really doing this?" "What?" he asked, sending tea to a lab. Because the maid panicked, Charles rubbed his forehead. "I just need peace of mind, Elena." "Peace of mind?" she repeated, her smile brittle. "You've had nothing but peace in this house. Maybe you're just looking for reasons not to trust me anymore." He didn't answer. He just left. Later that afternoon, Mara was dusting the hallway when she overheard muffled voices in the sitting room. Elena's and another man's. "He's starting to question things," Elena whispered. A man replied, low and firm. "Then it needs to be over soon." Mara froze, clutching the duster. She peered through the cracked doorway and saw a tall man in a gray suit standing close to Elena. Recognition hit her. It was Dr. Scott Larkin, the family physician. Elena placed a hand on his arm. "You promised it would be clean," he sighed. "It will be. But now he's getting curious. One test result and we're done." Mara felt her throat tighten. One test result. Done. She backed away, heart pounding, and nearly knocked over a vase. Elena's head snapped up. "Mara?" The maid bolted down the hall before either of them could stop her. That evening, Mara packed a small bag, hands trembling. She told herself she'd leave in the morning, but as she folded her uniform, she remembered Charles's tired face, his quiet kindness, the way he'd once left her an envelope at Christmas with a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for making this house feel like home." She couldn't walk away. Not yet. At dinner, the air felt brittle. Charles barely ate. Elena forced conversation about the foundation gala next month. Then, just as Mara came to clear the table, the phone rang. Charles stepped away to answer it. Elena seized the chance. "I know what you've been doing," she said quietly. Mara froze. "Ma'am, listening, watching, snooping. It's pathetic, really." Elena's lips curled into a faint smile. "Be careful, Mara. You don't want to make enemies in this house." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes said something else, something dangerous. Before Mara could respond, Charles returned. "That was the lab," he said, his voice tight. Both women turned toward him. "They're sending someone by in the morning to collect the rest of the samples." Elena forced a laugh. "You're really dragging this out, aren't you?" Charles ignored her and walked past, heading upstairs. That night, rain fell hard against the windows. The mansion creaked in the wind. Mara couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the kitchen light. Careful, deliberate, she crept downstairs and saw shadow moving near the counter. Elena, the wife, was holding something small and empty, violin, slipping it into her purse. Mara's breath caught. The floor creaked under her weight, and Elena turned sharply. Their eyes met across the dimly lit kitchen. For a moment, neither moved. Then Elena smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep?" Mara swallowed. "No, ma'am." "Well," Elena said, her tone chillingly calm, "a clean conscience does help." She walked past her, perfume heavy in the air, and disappeared up the stairs. Mara's knees nearly buckled. She wanted to scream, to call someone, but who would believe a maid over a billionaire's wife? The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Charles sat at the breakfast table, reading emails. Elena poured tea, her smile practiced. Mara stood near the doorway, frozen. When Elena handed Charles the cup, her hands didn't tremble at all. He raised it slowly to his lips. Mara's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. The scent was the same, sweet chamomile, honey, and something faintly metallic. And just before he drank, she saw it again, that strange shimmer across the surface. "Sir," she began, voice breaking, But before she could finish, Charles sipped. The world stopped. Elena's smile widened. Mara felt cold run down her spine. She knew it. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The sound of the cup landing on the table was soft, too soft for the chaos that was about to follow. At first, Charles didn't feel much, just a strange tightness in his chest, like the room had lost its air. He blinked a few times, rubbing his temples. "That's odd," he murmured. Elena's voice was smooth. "Maybe you stood up too fast." But Mara knew that wasn't it. She had seen enough in her life to recognize fear. And the way Elena's eyes darted to the clock told her this wasn't surprise. It was calculation. "Sir," Mara said, stepping forward, "you don't look well." Charles waved her off, trying to steady himself. "I'm fine, Mara, just dizzy." But seconds later, his hand slipped against the edge of the table. The teacup fell again, this time, breaking clean in half. Mara didn't think. She grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Double quotes. "Please, please send someone. My employer, he's not okay." Elena stood frozen. Then, when she realized Mara was calling for help, her composure cracked. "Give me that phone!" she shouted, lunging forward. Mara held on tight. "No, ma'am, you stay back." The two women locked eyes, one desperate, the other furious. Within minutes, sirens wailed down the long gravel driveway. Paramedics rushed in, taking Charles onto a stretcher. He was pale, sweating, fading in and out of consciousness. Elena followed behind, screaming that it was Mara's fault. "She's been acting strange for weeks," she cried. "She must have put something in his drink." Mara stood by the kitchen counter, shaking, unable to defend herself. Everything had happened too fast. At the hospital, tests confirmed what Mara feared most. The tea contained digitalis, a heart medication in doses strong enough to cause cardiac failure. The doctors called it poisoning. The police called it attempted murder. And within hours, the story spread like wildfire across Lexington. Local billionaire hospitalized after alleged poisoning. Detective Avery Ross arrived that night. He was a tall man with kind eyes, the kind who'd seen too many good people broken by bad choices. He sat across from Charles in the hospital room once the man regained consciousness. "Mr. Whitmore," he said gently, "we've confirmed what was in your system. Digitalis. Do you take any heart medication?" Charles shook his head weakly. "No, never have." The detective scribbled a note. "Then someone wanted to make you think you did." When Ross asked who had served the tea, Charles hesitated. He remembered everything: Mara's scream, Elena's calm voice, the look in her eyes. "My wife made it," he said quietly. "But Mara, she tried to stop me. Back at the mansion." Police searched the kitchen and found the same vial Mara had seen before, hidden behind a jar of flour. The label bore Dr. Scott Larkin's name. That was the moment. Charles knew the truth wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. The following morning, Elena was brought in for questioning. She denied everything, tears streaming down her face. "She's lying," she said when the detective mentioned Mara. "The maid's been obsessed with my husband for months." "You think I'd hurt him?" Her voice cracked, but not from grief, from control slipping. Charles sat behind the two-way mirror, watching her break. Every lie felt like a knife twisting deeper. And as he sat there, weak but conscious, one thought burned in his mind. The person who nearly ended my life shared my bed. That night, Mara was allowed to visit him at the hospital. She stood by the door, nervous, unsure if he'd even want to see her. But when Charles looked up, his eyes softened. "You saved me," He said simply, "I just did what anyone would have done." Mara replied. He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many people stay quiet even when something feels wrong." He looked down at his bandaged wrist where the fur ran and added softly, "Sometimes we trust the hands holding the cup, even when they're the ones mixing the poison. And maybe that's the real test of character. Not how much you see, but how much you're willing to stop, even when it costs you everything. If you've ever kept quiet to avoid trouble, even when you knew something was wrong, you understand exactly what Mara felt that night." He exhaled slowly. "Thank you for not staying silent." 2 days later, the toxicology report arrived. There were traces of Elena's fingerprints on the vial and faint residue of the same substance in her purse. But the part that made Charles's heart drop, text messages between Elena and Dr. Lark and Elena. "Once he's sick enough, you can take over the medical report. Larkin, he trusts me. We'll say it's stress. He'll never suspect. Elena, just make sure it looks natural." Charles read the words in silence, every letter cutting deeper. The woman he'd built an empire beside had been planning his downfall with another man. When Detective Ross came to tell him that both Elena and Dr. Larkin were being charged, Charles didn't speak. He simply nodded. Mara was cleared completely, but she still felt shaken. Every time she walked past a cup or the scent of chamomile, her stomach turned. Before she left the hospital that evening, she asked quietly, "What happens now, sir?" Charles looked out the window at the fading Kentucky sunset. "Now," he said, "we start being honest about the people we trust." He paused, glancing at her. "You ever notice how you can live under the same roof with someone and still not see who they really are?" Mara nodded softly. "Yes, sir, I have." The room fell quiet again. Outside, the sun sank behind the hills, casting long shadows over the city that once admired the perfect Whitmore family. And for the first time in years, Charles realized the truth. Perfection had been the disguise all along. The Whitmore mansion didn't feel like home anymore. Police tape still fluttered across one side of the kitchen, the sound of it whispering through the hallways whenever the air conditioning kicked on. The scent of bleach lingered, faint but haunting, as if trying to scrub away what had happened. Charles had been home for 2 weeks. Physically, he was healing. Emotionally, he was wrecked. He spent most mornings sitting on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the sun rise over the pastures. It used to bring him peace. Now it only brought questions. How long had she planned it? How much of their life together had been real? Mara still came by each morning. She didn't work there anymore, but she helped clean up what was left, the broken things no one else wanted to touch. She'd ask quietly if he'd eaten, then move through the house with gentle precision. Neither of them spoke much. Some silences said everything words couldn't. One afternoon, Detective Ross stopped by. "She's agreed to talk," he said. Charles looked up from his chair. "Elena, yeah, wants to see you before her arraignment tomorrow." For a long time, Charles said nothing. Then he nodded. "Set it up." When he walked into the county holding room the next morning, it was hard to believe the woman behind the glass was the same one who used to host fundraisers in sequin gowns. Elena looked smaller now, hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes, but her expression was still proud, still cold. "Charles," she said softly as he sat down. "Elena," the silence between them stretched thin. "You look tired," she said finally. "I hope you're taking care of yourself." He leaned back, voice steady. "I'm alive." "That's a start." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to kill you." Charles let out a short, Bitter laugh. Then what exactly do you call slipping poison into my tea? Her eyes flashed. It wasn't poison. It was a mistake. Scott said a small dose would help you relax, make you sleep better. I didn't know. He cut her off. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you didn't know what that drug could do. For the first time, her composure cracked. You think I wanted this? She snapped. You were never home anymore. You were married to your work. I tried to talk to you, but you didn't care. You cared about investors and buildings and people you could impress. Not me. Her voice broke, trembling. You stopped seeing me a long time ago. Charles. He looked at her quietly. So your answer was to end me? No, she said, tears in her eyes. My answer was to remind you that you're not invincible. I thought, maybe if you got sick, you'd slow down. You'd see me again. He shook his head slowly. That's not love, Elena. That's control. She lowered her gaze, voice small. Maybe I just wanted to matter again. The words hit harder than he expected. For a brief moment, he saw her, not as the woman who tried to destroy him, but as the lonely soul who got lost somewhere in the wealth they built. He stood to leave, but she looked up quickly. Wait. Her voice softened, desperate. Charles, please. I never wanted this to end like this. You know that, right? He turned halfway toward her. It already ended long before the tea. Outside, rain started falling. Thin Kentucky drizzle that carried the scent of wet earth and regret. Charles walked to his car in silence, staring at his hands. They were trembling. Mara was waiting at the mansion when he returned. She was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters again even though they were spotless. She talked. She asked quietly. He nodded. Yeah, she did. Mara hesitated. And she said she didn't mean to hurt me. He laughed under his breath. Funny thing is, I almost believe her. But that doesn't change what she did. Mara didn't reply. He looked at her then, really looked, the worry in her eyes, the exhaustion on her face. You've been through enough of this. You should rest, Mara. I will, she said softly. Just making sure you're okay first. Charles gave a tired smile. You're the only one who's asked me that in weeks. That night, the local news reported that Elena and Dr. Larkin had both been charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. The anchor said the pair had been secretly transferring money from Whitmore accounts into offshore investments under a medical trust. Charles turned off the TV halfway through. He didn't need to hear more. He poured himself a cup of tea, plain black, no sugar, and stared at it for a long time. He thought about how something as harmless as a cup of tea had become the symbol of everything he'd lost. When he finally took a sip, it tasted bitter, no matter how hot or fresh it was. The next morning, he went for a walk near the stables. The horses kicked up dew as they moved, their breath fogging the cold air. He stopped at the fence line, closing his eyes. For once, the silence didn't feel empty, just honest. He heard footsteps behind him. Mara had followed, holding his jacket. You left this inside, she said. Thanks. He took it and smiled faintly. You ever think about how easily people hide behind kindness? She tilted her head. What do you mean? I mean, people smile. They say the right words. They make the tea. They tuck you in. And you think that means they love you. But sometimes it's just habit. Mara nodded slowly. Yeah, some folks confuse caring with control. Charles looked out over the fields. Maybe that's why we miss the good ones. We expect them to look louder. She gave a small laugh. You talking about me, sir? He chuckled. Maybe. For the first time in months, he smiled without forcing it. Later that evening, he received a call from Detective Ross. Elena's lawyer just withdrew, Ross said. She's refusing a plea deal. Wants a trial. Charles sighed. She's still fighting? Ross hesitated. Before she was taken back to her cell, she told one of the officers something strange. Said to tell you, check under the oak tree by the east pasture. You'll understand everything. Charles's heart skipped. What's under it? Ross paused. We don't know. But she sounded dead serious. He hung up, standing alone in his quiet kitchen, the ticking of the clock echoing like a heartbeat. Whatever Elena had hidden, it was waiting there, beneath that tree, buried in the soil of a life he no longer recognized. And in that moment, Charles realized his story wasn't over yet. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of Kentucky morning where fog clings low to the fields and everything feels like it's holding its breath. Charles stood on the porch staring out toward the east pasture. The oak tree was hard to miss, a massive old thing that had stood there longer than the house itself. Its branches curled like old arms, strong and patient. He remembered when he'd proposed to Elena under that very tree. They'd carved their initials into the bark. Back then, it had felt like a promise that would last forever. Now it was just another place haunted by what used to be. Still, he went. The ground was soft from the rain, his boots sinking slightly as he approached. The December wind cut through his coat. For a moment, he almost turned back, afraid of what he might find. But he did in single quotes T. He picked up a shovel from the stable and began to dig. At first, there was nothing but roots and mud. Then, a sound. A dull scrape against metal. Charles crouched down, brushing away the soil with his hands. Beneath the earth was a small, weathered lockbox. He carried it back to the porch, wiped the dirt away, and broke it open with a hammer. Inside were papers, receipts, old photos, and a single folded letter with his name on it. He hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakably Elena's. Charles, if you're reading this, then you found what I couldn't say out loud. I didn't start out trying to hurt you. I just wanted to feel seen again. Somewhere between our first business deal and your 10th board meeting, I disappeared from your life. I became furniture in the house we built together. Scott made me feel noticed again, and I mistook that for love. I thought if you got sick, I could nurse you back and we'd start over. That you'd remember what we were before the world turned you into the man everyone else needed. It wasn't about money. Not at first. It was about mattering. But greed has a way of twisting good intentions into something unrecognizable. I'm sorry. For all of it. Elena. Charles read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and set it on the porch rail. The ache in his chest wasn't anger anymore. It was sorrow, the kind that settles deep, heavy, and quiet. He stood there for a long while, watching the clouds drift past the hills. Mara came up behind him, holding two cups of coffee. Found what you were looking for. He nodded slowly. Yeah, and a little more than I wanted. She handed him a cup. Sometimes the truth's like that. Comes with splinters. He gave a faint smile. You ever think we spend half our lives trying to convince ourselves people are who we wish they were? Mara looked down at her cup. Maybe. But I think the other half spent forgiving ourselves for believing them. They stood there quietly, sipping coffee as the wind rustled through the grass. A few weeks later, the trial began. The town followed it like a scandal from a soap opera. Headlines, whispers, speculation. But Charles didn't attend. He'd already heard enough lies to last a lifetime. Instead, he focused on rebuilding, not his business, not his reputation, but himself. He sold the mansion in Versailles and moved to a smaller home just outside of Nicholasville. Nothing fancy, just a two-bedroom with creaky floors and a back porch that faced the woods. It was the kind of place where quiet didn't hurt. Mara came by once a week to help with cleaning, though she refused payment at first. You already did enough, he told her. You'd have done the same, she said simply. But he insisted, not out of obligation, but gratitude, the kind that words couldn't repay. One afternoon, she arrived to find an envelope sitting on the kitchen counter with her name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a letter of reference and a check, enough to start her own cleaning business. At the bottom, in Charles's handwriting, were the words, "For the woman who saw the truth when no one else did." Mara pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling up. Months passed. Elena's trial ended with a guilty verdict. Dr. Larkin took a plea deal. Charles never went to see her again. He didn't hate her anymore. He just didn't have anything left to say. One day, he drove past the old estate. The new owners had painted it white again, and the oak tree still stood, unchanged, unbothered, eternal. He rolled down the window for a moment, just to breathe in the air. The same wind that once carried laughter now carried only the faint hum of memory. That evening, he stopped by a small cafe on the corner of Main Street. The waitress brought him a cup of tea, chamomile. He smiled at the irony. The steam curled up, soft and golden. For a moment, he almost didn't touch it. Then, slowly, he lifted it to his lips and took a careful sip. It tasted warm, real. Not like the past, not like regret, just tea. He set the cup down, watching people through the window, families laughing, couples holding hands, strangers living ordinary, honest lives. For the first time in a long time, he didn't envy them. He was one of them. And as he sat there, sunlight cutting through the glass, he realized something simple. Sometimes the richest people aren't the ones who build empires. They're the ones who survive them. In the end, the maid didn't just save a man's life. She saved what was left of his soul. And the billionaire, who once had everything, finally learned that the most dangerous poison wasn't in the cup. It was in the love that stopped being real.